Interpreters, ladies and gentlemen, are you ready to work? Are you ready to take on the big responsibility with your client? Are you prepared? Do you know how to? There we are. Here we have the good practice guidelines for you. Let's look at it together. What does it say here? Client details. Obviously, you have to know basic personal details about your client, age, gender, nationality, and language for sure, dialect, or any other contact information. The more you know, the better for you. And then we have the content and logistics of the meeting. It's very important. Let's look at it together. The general nature and context of the meeting information shall be handed in to you before the session. So you should exactly know where and how. The rendezvous, date, time, exact location, expected duration is equally significant. Also for you to know how to commute and or transport, or maybe get your car, maybe get the bus, wherever you are at. So you have to know everything about it. And number 3, facts about the service provider. You have to recognize who you are going to deal with in the session, absolutely. So it's important to know the name and the contact details of the person who sets the meeting. Another important individual to be familiar with is the practitioner concerned in the appointment. Therefore, his name and role are necessary. There is no too much information in that session, ladies and gentlemen. Get as informed as possible. Other information. Not all interpretation setting is the same. You may be assigned to special cases. There are also client requests that you have to consider. For example, you may encounter 1 or 2 of the following information. A family member, relative, guardian, or the person will be present. You have to know that. And or a probable site translation, a mainly serious or sensitive topic. A specialized environment will be the location. A highly technical or specialized terminology is to be expected, and the like. Whichever may be possible, you should definitely be informed. Pre-interview. So there is usually a pre-interview. You will be advised if the practitioner has requested for one. Reminders before the session agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, before you put any pen to any paper, you really have to know every single detail about it. Let's look at it. Interpreters do not accept any interpretation work right away. You have to consider several things before saying yes to work offer. Below are some reminders to consider. Let's look at them before the agreement actually happens. Check the date, time, place, and travel planning availability for sure. Make sure those factors such as language, nationality, gender, or the like are appropriate match. Verify if there is a possible conflict of interest. Ensure that you are the right interpreter for the job. There may be some subject matters or specialized areas that do not belong to your line of expertise. You remember the ethics we talked about in other units, so you don't have to say yes to every single job unless you feel really, at least maybe not competent, but as prepared as a competent. You can make yourself ready for the job, but before being ready, don't ever take it. If you are actually honest to yourself, and then you are honest to your client, and that pays off, you might be losing that job, but many more would come. Otherwise, you might make a mistake that can cost you the whole career. Session preparation. Are you ready yet for the session? Remember to be at your best always. A professional interpreter is always ready for any session. But what are the things to prepare? Be reminded of the following. Get in touch with the client ahead of time. However, there will be instances when it's no longer your job or it does not look professional if you will be one to contact the client. It depends on your agreement with the company, if you're working for the company, for example. Wait until further advised. If you are asked to do so, you may call up the client and make sure she is aware of the date, time, and location of the appointment. If the client is not picking up the phone, do not leave any message right away. That's important. Some clients are sensitive and meticulous. Double check what's the proper thing to do. So you should really know everything about it. Explore. Exert some effort to do a research. You may want to get yourself familiarized with a certain subject matter. Also get yourself ready with a handful of vocabularies relevant to a specific topic. As we were talking about, you might not be the expert of the issue, but you can prepare yourself. If you feel that you can prepare yourself without cheating on yourself and your own ethics, go for it. But do your job the best. Especially if you're not good in directions, give yourself a favor to find out how to get the meeting, how to get to the meeting venue. Like I, for example, am not at all. I have to probably go a rehearsal trips 2 or 3 times until I not get lost there. You can locate the place as soon as you already have the address. However, if the client's home will be the venue, consider your health and security issues, definitely. The soonest possible time you may request to do the session outside or nearby the client's home. It depends on the matter, the subject, the client, the whole situation. Do the necessary paperwork which will be needed in the session. The interpreter invoice, interpreter monitoring, and practitioner monitoring forms should be properly filled out. So now we almost know a little bit how to prepare in our mind. This is a little bit of mind preparation. Let's go more further. The pre-interview situation. When the practitioner requested for a pre-interview, then you should know the following. The pre-interview is not a requirement. It depends with the practitioner to request for a pre-interview or not. So there may be a chance that the practitioner gives you a history background of the case before the appointment to make you more informed. The practitioner may ask for it, or you'll be the one. Yes, or you'll be the one to make a request if, again, the case is a little bit sensitive or you're not very comfortable about what might happen, then you might ask for one. It is possible that a pre-interview is relative to a specialist meeting. Example cases are child abuse, domestic violence, mental health evaluation, and terminal disease. And on the other hand, once a practitioner is not likely to be aware of the precise issue, a pre-interview is sometimes related to a regular or preliminary appointment. So in these kind of actually specific cases, one must take further steps to make sure that everything goes okay. The surgery of a general practitioner with a hectic schedule is, for example, definitely should be considered carefully. Things to discuss with the practitioners pre-interview. You need the right information that will give an important effect on your interpretation procedure. However, be cautious enough to accept only factual information. Well, always remember that the opinion of the practitioner must not affect your neutrality. The practitioner is side, whereas probably you know that you shouldn't be. The sides, you're just bridging. You are just delivering, not in terms of negotiating, but in terms of translating in interpretation. Below are some of the proper things to be discussed professionally in a pre-interview. 1. Any possible difficult behavior occurrence and how the interpreter is going to handle the situation. Again, it depends on the case and the client. Background of the case is factual information. Cite examples of previous cases when the practitioner has not understood cultural insinuation. So maybe there have been done some trials of any interpretation sessions, but there might have been some problems, and now maybe you might have been called to fix the issue. And explanation of procedures and terms or jargons to be used. Jargons. This is, we talked about it all the time, and I can't say it enough. It is cultural, ladies and gentlemen. Everything is like cross-cultural. And then we're going to go, maybe we did, but we will still go furtherly detailed about it. But jargons can be expected to be used. It depends on the case. Intention of the present discussion. What is the actual intention? Learn how the client's name will be pronounced is also very important. Because around the languages there is sometimes spellings and pronunciation might not match, and then you might figure out wrongly, and this is embarrassing and it's discouraging also for the client, specifically in sensitive cases like a child or a vulnerable person, or there you have to be very careful. And the positive and negative effects of discussing cultural information. We said that it is always good to know the difference and the sensitive issues between the cultures, but let's read where should we actually pay attention to. Talking about cultural information is more often than not necessary in interpretation setting. There are instances when various practitioners ask for cultural information with reference to Black and minority ethnic communities who may be present in the session. Providing truthful information may help to smooth the progress of understanding. Also, ladies and gentlemen, I think when you're dealing with English, here in North America, as you know, we are very careful about political correctness in certain vocabulary. Sometimes you might use maybe African American when you are translating or interpreting. For example, if somebody uses the word starting with the N we were using before, maybe you should actually transliterate them, transpolitically correctate them. I suddenly invented a word. Like an old lady should be maybe a senior lady. So you have to be very careful. And maybe if you have an access to a pre-interview with the practitioner, or if you have a boss, like you're working for an interpretation company, I would definitely clear up those things before getting into an embarrassing situation. The understanding of an interpreter about certain issues is important. This knowledge is suggested to be used by practitioners, for this may be appropriate to the health or social services meeting. So that's very important. And here are some examples of the possible areas with corresponding practitioner queries to the interpreter that may be significant. For example, on cultural or religious practices. Are most people from China Buddhists? So you have to know exactly what's going on in this culture. On specific minority ethnic community, can the client possibly work for a long period of time? On health and social services being used to a different system, what is the social worker's function in Japan? So whatever you're doing in terms of going back and forth and helping two people talking different languages, ladies and gentlemen, if you are really the master of these two languages, fortunately or unfortunately, you have to be also the master of the culture of these languages. You have to always keep yourself updated about, first of all, the history a little bit, the social structure, history, and also what's happening today. So you have to be always, your eyes and your ears should be on the news, on any, documentaries and books and libraries. You have to be curious, curious, curious. We are saying that curiosity kills the cat, but curiosity helps the interpreter. Okay, cultural information, on the other hand, if discussed in the wrong way, can have a negative effect. Oh yes, now you're going in a very, very narrow bridge here. So how? It can help build up typecasted views of certain groups, the stereotypes. Be wary to keep away from making statements that could be used in this way. As you know, many cultures or nationalities, due to historical events, have certain formed prejudices, let's say, or ready ideas about each other, group of people, in the history, because of the current political situation or certain tensions. But you are not Kofi Annan, you are not the United Nations person there. You only have to be very neutrally looking at the case without making a mistake. So it's a very, very delicate issue. Take note that it is essential to judge this balance. There are some questions which cannot be answered without consulting first a practitioner, like, is it an ordinary practice for parents to hit their children, or is it a patriarchal society, or the understanding of a practitioner in these issues in relation to Northern Irish society is needed. Remember to avoid any opinions or stereotypes that could be interpreted as damaging. Because one mistake can actually, you are dealing with two parts. You are like the referee almost in a game, but you don't have to have the decision. You just transfer and transmit the information. So one wrong step can actually create war, or tension at least. This is exaggerated, but tension between the parties. You don't want that. There might be even an existent tension between the parties. If it depends on the case, it depends on the nature of the interpretation. It can be something related to the law, court, fight, divorce. So you should be keeping your cool and being factual, only factual. Okay, client's pre-interview. There are some instances before the session when the interpreter is requested to meet the client and have a pre-interview. This is likely to happen when the practitioner has no pre-interview. The pre-interview with the client is also possible when the interpreter meets the client in a standby area before the meeting. When we were talking about the politics in one of the units, we were talking about as well, like the media translation. You might be remembering that you should actually meet the guest before and let him or her know you too, and make him or her aware that you would be translating and his or her speeches will be translated. Similar here. In that case, they know that they will be translated, but they might have some questions and you might maybe want to hear the dialect before. So these are important things. Some of the useful ways of clients' pre-interview are stated here. The client's knowledge of English can be evaluated. The background to some problems that the client has encountered previous to contact with the interpreter can be acquired. You can check the extent of the client's familiarity with a certain service area she makes use of. Maybe it's just a lack of knowledge, then you can figure it out easily. You can introduce yourself formally to the client. You may also get hold of a brief history of the existing care or service. If it's a law court, if it's a healthcare service, so you should know if you're dealing with an insurance, like a coverage, healthcare coverage, for example, you should know how they proceed in that specific case. As a professional interpreter, you should advise the practitioner before the session starts that you already made a pre-interview with the client. You should tell them. Inform the practitioner the vital information you have discussed with the client, like you already made a formal introduction of yourself. With the authorization of the client, sum up the pre-interview main points. For instance, GP's appointment. You can mention that the client stated that she had been having headaches. Otherwise, the client may suppose you have relayed this information by now and may not say it again. Creating diagnosis type statements should be avoided. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a very important issue here. I know that I have actually conducted and created some television interviews before, both with or without interpreting. The pre-meeting with the guest makes actually a wrong impression, which can be avoided by your taking care of it. When imagine he wants to say something to the audience, in that case to the doctor. When you meet that person before, have a brief pre-meeting, he says something, what he or she is going to say when it starts, but because he told it already to you, he he forgot it, or he thinks that I said it already, whereas the person who has to hear it is not you, is the doctor or whoever. So the pre-interviews, I definitely suggest taking notes if the client allows to do so. With the taking notes in interpreting, you should be also aware that A, you need a permission for that from both parties, whoever is there present, and B, you should make sure, because it's the confidentiality in here, you should make sure that you actually cancel and delete them after that, so don't leave anything. But I would definitely take care of what has been spoken in a pre-interview in order to avoid the client missing something in the real one. Okay, the start of the session. Now it's going. We are starting now. On arrival, you should let the concerned receptionist know of your arrival and of the clients. Introduce yourself as the assigned interpreter, because you are it now. Always wear and display your interpreter identification. Once you get inside the meeting or hanging out or having a tag, whatever, in what form ever, the meeting hall and all throughout the course of the session, so that people who approach you exactly know where you are, who you are, and how they should actually approach you. Always consider your own health and protection. If the meeting will be held in a place or home of the client, now know how to guard yourself from any possible risk. What does that mean? In case of a disease, an epidemic, or infectious disease, or flu even, you can never know whether somebody could be in danger, or you might be already having some health issues that come with a little mask and ask for permission and also for excuse, because you don't want to be in a risk, you don't want to be risking people, as well you don't want to be at risk if you're dealing, for example, with healthcare. When you're interpreting in a war situation on the media, that's different. Then you need probably bullet-free stuff and so on. But that's not that dangerous, I guess. On the introduction of the interpreter to the client, how to formally introduce yourself as an interpreter to the client. Remember the pointers below that will guide you on how to do it right way. Let's look at them together. State your name and introduce yourself as an interpreter if it seems necessary. Give details of your responsibility as interpreter, your duty, job description there. Make it clear to the client what interpreting service company you work for. You might be freelance, but you might be, as we said, working for somebody. Then make it clear. And then, if it's a free service, inform the client that there'll be no charge for your service. For example, immigration sometimes can be covered by the state. You never know. So it depends on the case, but make sure that if it's free, they know it, because they might be, just because of that, intimidated and look at you with dollar eyes, or how am I going to pay you? Okay, ensure the confidentiality of your service to the client. Very important. Everything should be really behind the walls or between the walls, and they might be really feeling comfortable and also confident that everything is going to be staying there. Put in plain words to the client. All she has to say will be interpreted, because that is part of your job as an interpreter. I mean, sure, when he probably says coughs, you don't say coughing. Then not that much. But you have to make him sure, or her, that every single thing, even if she says like, oh my God, like an interjection, should be interpreted. So if there is any that she does not want to the practitioner know, she has to keep it to herself. Otherwise, you will have to translate precisely what she says. Please warn your client ahead. Now we are coming to 6. Request your client for permission to interpret. You can tell her that she has the right to choose her interpreter, but if she does not prefer you to be of service to her, for any reason, can happen, you'll be glad to help her arrange another interpreter available that day. That's one of the points of the ethics, by the way. We'll come to that. Again, respectfully obtain the client's consent if it is all right for you to be her interpreter that day. So if everything is okay, you might start working. On introduction of the interpreter to the practitioner, now we are dealing with it. Aside from the client, you also have to introduce yourself to the practitioner, either verbally or by means of the services interpreter introduction sheet. Let the practitioner be familiar with your introduction details. Make your introduction using the guidelines here. Formally state your name, position, and who set the meeting. Make initiative to introduce the client to the practitioner if they do not know each other. Share with the practitioner the correct pronunciation of the client's name and the proper way to address the patient. However, if you have done this at pre-interview, obviously there is no need to reiterate. Should there be an allowable pre-interview with the client, you have to sum up to the practitioner's main points of the pre-interview. So you have to know what has been talked already in both of the pre-interviews. Interpreting interview supervision. During the interview period, ladies and gentlemen, make sure that you have turned off your mobile phone or any electronic gadgets. God, we live in an iPhone century here. I know it's difficult, or the pagers or anything else, but nothing should interrupt you. This is your sign of respect as an interpreter. When it comes to sitting arrangement, the formation is usually triangular, like the service provider, client, and interpreter. Triangular arrangement will increase the client's confidence. Feel like in a triangle, it's better than being face to face, or you're like sitting together with somebody and somebody's across. No, this is no good. In addition, this formation is appropriate for interpretation to let you communicate clearly with the practitioner and client. So you have actually the same facial stand to each other, basically. Now, manner of speech. The style of speech to make use of an interpretation is either direct or indirect. The interpreter should use the direct manner or the first person in the majority situations. For instance, instead of saying, "He declares that his stomach aches," this is rather gossip, say, "My stomach aches." Yeah? My stomach aches, not his stomach aches. On the other hand, the interpreter may have to use the indirect speech or the third person in condition that the speech is mainly emotional, or if otherwise the practitioner has commanded it. Repeating back. Repeating back is chiefly helpful when directions have been given. For example, when the clinician has prescribed the patient the course of treatment, repeating back is necessary. This method is usually used by interpreters to make sure that the understanding between two parties has been established. Even if you're a secretary in a company, ladies and gentlemen, say in a travel agency, when you book for a flight, you confirm, you repeat. So it's always good to know it one more time. Interpreters do not intervene the interpreting session for no reason. You must let both parties know all the time why interference, if ever necessary, is necessary. You can only do the intervention for the following several reasons. If you were not able to completely comprehend the idea you are being asked to interpret, you can make some clarifications. 2. In the event that the practitioner or the client has not understood the message and you're certain to be right, it is all right for you to point out the misunderstanding. You can also intervene to get attention of either party to a declaration that may assume a dissimilar meaning to its intended original meaning. Also, if there is an assumption of information and if there is something that has been inferred but not stated, you are free to do the information. And so we'll say it probably again, but never ever talk about yourself as I. Because imagine you are interpreting the client by saying, "I have a stomach ache, I have lost weight, I had fever yesterday," and then you go and turn to the practitioner and say, "I didn't understand, can I ask one more time?" He will automatically think these are the words of the client and not yours, because you are eyeing all the time. So what can I do if you want to say something as an interpreter? then use your noun. The interpreter wants to make a certain issue clear. Is it okay? Then they will understand it's you who is talking and not you're talking on behalf of your client. Okay, example. On different meaning inferred. In a purpose of getting the birthday of a client, for example, a health guest requested for the passport. However, your client may have a different inference. She may think that her status is being questioned by the health guest. Because, with the passports and the everything, people are very paranoid or very anxious. So in this scenario, you can intervene, definitely. You may explain the client the reason of the guest, and you may suggest the client to provide any document that contains her date of birth. Then get back to the health visitor and inform him what transpired. That's also very important. On inferred but not stated and knowledge assumed case, a patient needs a minor surgery. In this regard, the general practitioner may offer a hospital referral. However, due to financial problem, the patient is resistant, but she's afraid to get embarrassed, so she cannot say her disapproval. The GP then may assume that the client knows there is no charge for such treatment. You can interfere in the situation to tell both parties that there is a misunderstanding over the issue and further explanation is suggested. That's why, ladies and gentlemen, do you remember before when we were preparing, we were talking about you have to be exactly informed about how that certain institution proceeds the issue, what are the rules there, how does the system work. If you already know these things, you might even also guess that the finances might be an issue for the client since he or she doesn't know it could be offered for free. So you know now how it's important to, or how important it is to be prepared. Okay, 4. When the practitioner needs to be aware of the systems within the culture of the client, interference is possible. How? After consultation with the client, you may explain the practitioner the client's culture, which is a great factor of her behavioral ways. For instance, it's a customary cultural practice for the Chinese mother and baby to stay at home for 1 month after childbirth. Because of this Chinese birth tradition, a Chinese mother who has recently given birth may not be able to attend the session. Well, or if you're dealing with a Turkish mother, from my own experience and expertise in there, we mostly take care of the kids until they are 3 months old. We don't want to take them out too much. Whereas in North America, our babies are there, even like I see in supermarkets, like 2-week-old babies, 2-week-old. But no, in certain countries, people are more afraid of them getting cold or getting germ or whatever. So there are different cultures and different things. For the reason of reminding any questions that client or practitioner may wish to inquire, you can do the intervention. Yes. As a professional interpreter, you shall not tolerate cultural inconsiderateness, discriminatory behavior, or typecast assumptions. In the presence, therefore, of any discrimination or stereotypes, do your job to intervene. Otherwise, you might be right in the middle of a big war between two people, and everything will be very unsympathetic. And you know what? Even you might be charged for the whole unsympathetic situation because maybe of one word they think you might have misinterpreted or something. So it's very important because you will be also getting involved. Go there and intervene. The number of hours of interpretation must be observed. You can definitely interfere in order to make sure that the allotted time for the interpreting procedure is properly maintained. When you verify with the client if there is an additional question, intervention is allowed. This is to properly conclude the session, actually, like the final, so as to make certain that the client has understood completely all the information and details made available. Now the post-session, like we actually announced. At the conclusion of the session, pointers to do every after end of the session to ensure that the client has total comprehension of all the details, request her to repeat back. You know, like in a telephone, like booking. The room number 305, isn't it? Same here. You must be sure that they understood everything. You may remind the client of the queries she wanted to inquire, as the client also if she has more questions. Number 3, remember to complete the invoice. The invoice template must be filled in with all the session details, although this is best done prior to meeting. I would do it like that. Ask the practitioner to attach his signature and include the end time on the invoice. The budget holder, practitioner's line manager, ward manager, or lead reception administrator must then sign the invoice. Paperwork, ladies and gentlemen, must be totally flawless. Ask the practitioner to recognize the appropriate person for a faster process, if there is one. When the authorized signatory has signed the invoice, you should send it to the significant finance department for payment. When authorized signatory is not available, the authorized signatory is not there, for invoicing, you should make a copy of the invoice. Acquire a duplicate invoice copy. If there is no available photocopier or scanner, use a new template and copy all information. Just pass it on. Give the practitioner the original invoice to be processed by passing it to the authorized signatory and sending it on to the appropriate finance department. For your reference, you should keep the invoice copy with the practitioner's mark to indicate it is just a duplicate. So much work, so much paperwork. Ladies and gentlemen, that's crucial because everything should be really working like a clockwork. Otherwise, one mistake can either leave you without being paid or have them without being done it or having done it, and then misinterpretations, and then your bureau is going to call and the practitioner is going to say something. So avoid all that with having everything correct and intact. If there are several practitioners in a particular department present at the meeting, ask the last practitioner you deal with to sign the invoice. In the case of moving departments being involved in the appointment, you should check with the practitioner who is the right signatory, whoever is the authority there. Interpreter monitoring form should be filled out. Make sure that within 7 days of the meeting, you have already returned it to the interpreting service manager. Now, you can remind the practitioner and the client that they have to course the interpreting request through the interpreting service should they need a follow-up meeting. So they have to call basically your company again. You can also remind them that they can ask for same interpreter if you think they're satisfied with your service. That's definitely also depending on your schedule, but they can have that. So post-interview and session, be ready for a possible post-interview with a practitioner. This is to shed light on understanding aspects because you want the client to have understood everything, but you also want to know the last mind status of the practitioner there, so how it went. But you should not talk about the client's points of view again. So what you have interpreted stayed there. It's finished. As soon as it's finished, it's finished. Don't ever discuss or keep on interpreting, let's say so. Once the session has been concluded, you're back as a private citizen. Finished. You're yourself again. Totally private. But you have to take into account that should you stay with the client long after the meeting, she may ask for voluntary recommendation and extended services. People like when they are being helped. If you allow this to happen, you can be in a difficult situation. Beware. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you see here, this is a very, very carefully taken job, and you should be prepared, during prepared, for the post prepared. But when it's over, everybody will be happy. You're going to go back to your business or to your service, or maybe home as a normal private citizen waiting for the next opportunity. Thank you for listening.